Tēnā tātou katoa. Firstly, thank you all for coming along this morning to listen to Yvonne and myself. We are giving a presentation on Te Ao Māori values-based research and wetland health. So this presentation is part of an EnviroLink project to help support regional council staff to understand and engage in collaborative research and management. And this is really focused around addressing priorities in the regional council research, science and technology strategy. So it's important to remember that this presentation is really a starting point. We've condensed a whole lot of information into only 20 slides. So yeah, we hope that you're interested and want to learn more. So I'll start off by introducing myself. Ko pūtauaki ko maua o ngā maunga, ko ohini mataro ko waikare o ngā awa, ko ngai tamaraoho ko Ngati Pūki ko ngā hapū, ko Ngati awa ko Ngati rangi nui ngā iwi, ko Mahuru Wilcox Yvonne Taura. I am Mahuru and I'm a researcher at Manaaki Whenua based in Hamilton. My background is freshwater and wetland ecology, but I do all sorts of mahi supporting iwi and hapū in the science research space. Kia ora.
Kia ora Mahuru, kia ora koutou, ko Ao, here I tēnei no Naitirangi, Ngati rangi nui, Ngati unaku, Ngati haua ngā iwi, kei te mahi au, he kairanga hau Māori mō Manaaki Whenua, ko Yvonne Taura tōki ingoa. So kia ora everyone, I'm Yvonne. I also work with Mahuru within the Manaaki Ao Māori research team based here in Hamilton, and we're also members of the Wetlands project led by Manaaki Whenua, in which I'm the VM lead for that. So kia ora, it's awesome to be here with you, and hopefully we've got some great learnings for you this morning. So kia ora.
So a bit of an outline of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to look at the question, why collaborate with Māori, and address some of those priorities within Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Regional Council Research, Science and Technology Strategy. We're going to discuss some processes for collaborations that we've used ourselves and talk about a couple of case studies in the wetland space that we have done with iwi in the Waikato. And then briefly touch on a few tools that are being used by other iwi and hapū around the country in different environments, so including forests, estuaries, rivers and streams. So I'm going to pass on to Yvonne now.
So kia ora. So most of you would be pretty familiar with the treaty rights and responsibilities when working with iwi and hapū, but just for some context, it's well recognised that Mātauranga Mori is a valued knowledge system when it comes to our intergenerational observations of Te Tai Ao. So incorporating Te Ao Māori values into environmental policy adds value to our resource management system. So under the treaty, the Crown and Māori relationships must be adhered to in environmental policy and resource management arrangements. So some key responsibilities are to develop, improve and monitor the relationship between the Crown and Māori to deliver effective legislation, regulation and policy that meets obligations to iwi and hapū as treaty partners. To lead the negotiation of natural resource related redress with iwi and hapū and Treaty of Waitangi settlements, and to implement our agreements and commitments with Māori. And this requires developing good working relationships with iwi and hapū, as well as partnering with them on environmental work programs. So under priority 2, the incorporation of Mātauranga Mori, various factors have been identified, and these include understanding Te Ao Māori and how to bridge Mātauranga Mori alongside Western science to support diverse knowledge and information systems that inform policy, planning and management, increase Māori engagement and participation through a bicultural approach to developing and understanding knowledge systems that include Te Ao Māori perspectives, improving engagement and collaboration with iwi and hapū on projects and activities that include Mātauranga Mori, such as our Māori-centred environmental frameworks, which we'll be showing you shortly, and addressing complex issues such as environmental, economic, social and cultural, using Mātauranga Mori in science. investigating processes to co-develop appropriate regional environmental monitoring programs that include cultural monitoring for our different ecosystems such as lands, soils, biodiversity, waterways, and including our wetlands, and understanding mātauranga Māori and perspectives alongside science to support community discussions, advice, and decision making.
So our values as Māori are really important as they underpin our behaviours, so how we interact with each other as people, but also the world around us and our atua Māori. So we view the environment as a sacred gift from ngā tua katoa to sustain life. So not just human life, but life of the natural world around us. All of this is really grounded in the principle of whakapapa, which connects us to place and everything within it. So that's why as regional council you need to engage with iwi and hapū from the rohe that you are within, because that is very specific to that area. And it really recognises that mana whenua, tangata whenua status, and again upholds those treaty obligations. So what are some ways that non-Māori organisations can include those relationships and values? So this is just one process that has been developed alongside Waikato Tainui when looking at implementing the NPS and the NOF, National Objectives Framework for Freshwater. So this process is quite general and broad, and it can be adapted to include the tikanga and the methods that the iwi within your rohe want to adhere to. So I won't go into this step by step in detail. We will link the report from this, from where this process came from, so you can read about it in more detail. But it really shows you that the treaty-based planning framework is underpinning for policy development and implementation. And it's really about building those relationships and having that collaborative process throughout the entire, from beginning to end, from developing policy to implementing that monitoring stage, things like that. So now we're going to look more specifically at wetlands and show you some of the case studies that Yvonne and I have been part of.
So just quickly, just to give some wetland contents within Aotearoa, as we all know, repo are important globally. They provide us with a range of environmental, economic, social and cultural benefits, and these are known as ecosystem services. So wetlands remove nutrients and sediments that are washed in from the land and sometimes referred to as our nature's kidneys. So repo are effective carbon sinks, mitigating the impacts of climate change, and they also provide kai and cultural resources, and within the context of Aotearoa, that includes rongoa Māori and raranga. So despite these valuable ecosystem services though, our repo throughout Aotearoa have been significantly reduced to only 10%, with ongoing threats to their survival. So a lot of this degradation is caused by drainage, nutrient loading on the whenua, rapid spread and growth of introduced plants, species and animal pests. So this is just a little map of our historic extent and our current extent. So as you can see, we've only got our two main wetlands here, Kapuatai and Whangamarino, which are now under Ramsar status, with only 4.9% of our wetlands remaining. And the South Island is such similar, with only 16% remaining, and a lot of the wetlands on the southern, on the west coast and Southland. So all out 10% remaining wetlands.
Those are some pretty depressing statistics, but there are some positive things happening as well. So just going back to mātauranga Māori more generally, so when documents like the Regional Council's Science, Research and Technology strategy says things like co-develop monitoring to include mātauranga Māori, as regional council staff, it may be quite overwhelming to figure out, well, what that is. And in short, it's very diverse. Mātauranga Māori is diverse, unique and specialised for each iwi, hapū and whānau, even down to the individual. So this is just some examples of what Mātauranga Māori can look like. So It could be based around whakapapa, tikanga, kaitiakitanga. It's holistic, it's ever evolving. And this is why it's important to collaborate specifically with iwi and hapū so they can define what their mātauranga is for themselves. So going back to more NOF language and implementing the NPS. So in this context, Mataranga Mori can include values and some of those indicators. So as mentioned, there may be some common values across iwi and hapū, but there are also very specific iwi hapū rohe values and indicators too. So again, regulatory bodies such as regional councils do not decide what these mana whenua values and indicators are and how they're included. This is why collaboration is so important. So the example we're going to chat about in the next slide will show you how these common values and outcomes from different worldviews can be used together.
Kia ora. So I have the pleasure of sharing with you the Ngati Haua Wetland Māori framework. Mahuru and I worked with the whānau of Ngati Haua who are based in Waikato, which was a great opportunity for me as I affiliate to Ngati Haua. So together we co-designed and co-developed a wetland framework that identified the values, indicators and goals for the restoration and monitoring of the wetlands, gullies and streams within the rohe of Ngati Haua. So within this project we paid special attention to the Mangaonua and the Mangaone streams, which was a priority identified in the Ngati Haua environmental plan. So we worked closely with Ngati Haua Mahi Trust, which is a charitable trust that leads environmental and restoration projects within the rohe, and also alongside the whānau of Waimakariri and Te Tiohaua Marae. So we formalised our research partnership at Rukumoana Marae, which is the principal marae of Ngati Haua, and this really set the foundation for our project of working collaboratively and together. We also identified a young tribal member interested in research, so we offered her a 3-month internship for her to come in to our offices here at Manaki Whenua and work closely with Mahuru and I on this project. So she became quite a valuable member of the project team, and we encouraged her to lead some of the milestones that were identified within this project. So we also interviewed our marae members and also members from Ngati Haua, which included kaumātua, kaitiaki, rangatahi, iwi members and practitioners. So while analysing some of our interviews, we thought it would be important to visually demonstrate to our whānau some of the key values that were coming up, that were reoccurring throughout their interviews. So I've just provided 2 examples here of some of the main themes that were coming through in our interviews. So as you can see, stream and marae, the main whakaaro that was coming out alongside kai, kōrero, whānau and wai. So these values were integral to understand the values, principles and beliefs that were being raised by each of our whānau. So this is the framework that we came up with. So after full analysis of our interviews and other key literature, the key values expressed by the whānau formed 4 overarching themes, and these were wai, whakapapa, mahi and mahinga kai. So wai focused on health of freshwater waterways and wetlands, whakapapa focused on people's connection to the landscape and each other, mahi discussed work on the ground and collaborative working relationships, and mahinga kai discussed the presence and or absence of mahinga kai within the rohe. So funnily enough, these themes actually aligned with those expressed within the Ngati Haua environmental plan, and so we changed these overarching themes to Te Hauaroa Te Wai, Te Hauaroa Te Tangata, Te Hauaroa Te Taiao and mahinga kai. So we also had one of our tribal members design this concept for us. It's really important to involve our whānau within this whole process. So this is a holistic concept of interconnectedness between the key values and indicators maintained by the use of the circular design. So all of these are kind of interweaving into each other, and it's really important to note that none of these values are more important than the other. So this Ngati Hawa Wetland Māori framework forms the foundational values and indicators for the development of a practical wetland monitoring tool to assist our whānau in future restoration projects within the Mangaonua and the Mangaone stream catchment. So this framework can be used alongside other monitoring tools, such as the CHI index that Mahuru will be talking about shortly. So this really helps enable the whānau of these marae to guide and lead their own initiatives that are led by mātauranga a iwi, a hapū, a marae o Ngati Hawa. It also gave me an opportunity to work closely with our whānau and help bring together this framework, and hopefully we've got some more work to do with them in the future. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Yvonne. So the example I'm going to talk about is based around my master's research, which feels like a lifetime ago now, but it is an example that demonstrates what happens when we get to the monitoring stage. A lot of these projects we're working in at the moment, we're not quite at the monitoring stage yet. So this gives you, a little insight to what co-monitoring can look like as well. So this work was in partnership with Ngati Whakamarurangi at Toreparu Wetland. So I really want to acknowledge the kaitiaki who are part of this research project. They are extremely knowledgeable and were just so open and helpful for me when, as a student, not really knowing what I was doing. So my key question was really looking at how do science and mātauranga Māori work together. And what I understood very quickly was that iwi values and aspirations were the foundation to all of this. So the process that we used was introducing, next slide please Yvonne, as I presented my research proposal to the marae, to Ngati Whakamarurangi, and talked about what some of the outcomes could be, and listened to them what they wanted as outcomes from the project. And so once we figured out what our common ground was, I was given approval to go ahead. So we identified some of the important aspects of the Toreparu wetland. As you can see from these pictures, it's quite a large wetland. It's 223 hectares. It's extremely remote. It's located between Mount Karioi south of Raglan on the west coast of the Waikato, and just north of Aotearoa Harbour. So we discussed some of the key indicators, what we could measure, that could show whether those values were of good health or not, and then created a scale for each indicator. So this work was based on the Wetland Cultural Health Indicator, and there are publicly available reports for that to discuss the process and how you can do that. So these are just some of the results. So because I do not whakapapa to that area, I didn't carry out the cultural health monitoring. The kaitiaki from the marae did. I was there to do the science monitoring. So on the left column here, you can see what happens when some of those results align. So this is the relationship. So I used the Pearson correlation value, or R value, to look at the soft bottom MCI score, which is the bit I did, and how that aligned with the Wetland Cultural Health Indicator score, which was done by kaitiaki. So here you can see a positive correlation across the different sites, and that really, when talking about those results with the kaitiaki afterwards, we realised that what they were identifying was that at the sites of low wetland, the CHI score, were high in sedimentation, and this aligns with what drives the MCI score for soft bottom invertebrates. So in both cases, sedimentation was seen as a negative impact, Can you go back, please, Yvonne? And then on the right-hand side here, there were examples of where the results were not aligned. So one of these examples was looking at cultural health indicator score and water temperature. So cooler temperatures are generally what we strive for, but the Kaitiaki scored those sites with lots of shade, lots of cover with really cool water temperatures as low for cultural health indicator. And I've found this quite interesting. So when going back and chatting to them about it, they said that cold water temperatures are not good for catching tuna because the tuna tend to hide and they don't move around so easily. So for them, having areas of open water with warmer water temperatures was actually beneficial. So again, you can see those difference in values and how that drives health and how we view health in the environment. Next slide, please. So yes, we can see two different worldviews and methods. They are complementary. They identify different management priorities, and this can inform planning, especially from a regional council perspective. So be careful though, because these are site-specific and unique to each area. Cultural health indicators need to be developed by tangata whenua from there. And they carry out the assessment, not regional council staff. And it's important that that ongoing communication happens from beginning to end. So when you are analysing the data, it's important to work with tangata whenua to figure out what your different messages are. Cool. Kia ora. So I said that we would touch very briefly on some of the other tools and approaches being used at the moment. So as mentioned, I talked about the cultural health indicator and Yvonne talked about developing a Māori-based framework. There is heaps of amazing mahi that's happening at the moment in this country, and the iwi are really taking charge in Te Urewera. They are looking at using kereru as a forest health indicator. There are some really beautiful publications on that and some short films. I'm not sure if they're available to the public, but if so, then I will link them in our follow-up email. Of course, there's a cultural health indicators for rivers and streams, which is developed by Gail Tipper, which inspired the wetland cultural health indicator, and then also estuarine monitoring. So this is work done by Niwa. So these are just a couple of examples of amazing mahi happening. And again, I'll add these links to the follow-up email so you can, find out more for yourself.
Can check them out. So our time has come to an end. So just in conclusion, what we've outlined this morning is collaboration with iwi and hapū, including the co-design and co-development of projects, is important and very possible. Engagement with iwi and hapū needs to occur at the project conception stage and be included throughout the whole duration. So that's the planning, implementation, and even beyond the life of the project. There are many tools, as Mahuru discussed, that have been developed from a Te Ao Māori perspective that iwi, hapū, kaitiaki and kairangaho alongside regional council can adapt for their own specific needs. And non-Māori and even Māori from other rohe have a role to support the collaborative process, but not determine the outcome for iwi and hapū. So this is a very innovative space where everyone can be involved in. So our last slide today, so if you're wanting some more examples of collaborative wetland projects, please check out Te Reo Te Repo, The Voice of the Wetland, which is co-edited by myself, Sheree Van Shavendijk-Goodman and Bev Clarkson. It's available on our Manaki Whenua website, and you'll also see Mahuru's Toreparu Wetland chapter in there as well. Just recently, we launched the bilingual educational wetland resources that were based on Te Reo Te Repo, and these are available on the Science Learning Hub website. And we're also right now currently creating the third handbook of our wetland series, which will also feature the Ngati Haua Māori wetland framework. So lots happening in this space. Lots lots for us to share with you. So I just wanted to thank you all for attending our webinar this morning, and to also acknowledge the team from EnviroLink Project bringing us here to discuss this topic. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou.
Thanks, Yvonne and Mahuru. That was great. We've got a few questions that have started to roll in, and I can only imagine that more and more and more are going to come in. So I'll get straight to it. So Mahuru, the first question's for you. Sophie has asked that she missed the name of the index. She was asking, is it Cultural Health Index for Repo?
Yeah, the Wetland Cultural Health Indicator.
Oh, and she's done a couple of follow-up questions, so there's two parts to this. She asked, are you referring to MCI for soft bottom streams, and can you use MCI for soft bottom streams to correlate to wetlands?
Yeah, so the areas that we were measuring were some of the tributary streams flowing into the wetland. So yes, we did use it in that case, yeah.
So I'm not sure which of you should answer this one, but there's two parts to this as well. So how do you ensure that data collected in a way that can be compared across sites and stored into the future?
Is that from someone from Regional Council or iwi and hapū?
Yeah, so I'll carry on with this question. He goes, concerns over ownership over data, important for the whānau to maintain control and ownership, but data collected and analysed in isolation becomes anecdote and can never be used to contribute to a national picture. How can this be balanced?
That's a really good question. It is a huge topic, the data sovereignty one, and with all our projects, we return all of our data to the iwi and hapū we worked with. We don't keep record of them because it's their knowledge, and they then have the choice of how they utilise that data in the future. So what was the first part of the question about being consistent across sites?
So how do you ensure that data collected in a way that can be compared across sites and stored into the future?
I guess for the projects we've worked on, we've used the same method, so it's consistent over time, and so therefore you can have some sort of comparison. Yeah, I guess that's one way that we deal with that. But yeah, the data sovereignty one is an ongoing one because a lot
of
and
it's not just in our environmental monitoring, it's across all of sciences. So yeah, we probably aren't the best to answer that question, but because we are part of that bigger discussion, definitely.
Cool, thanks guys. We've had a question come in from Mark, who has asked, how could we retrofit a collaborative process to monitoring programs that have been in place for 20 years already? Do you have any ideas?
I'm guessing you mean retrofit, so you're wanting to now include cultural health indicator monitoring or something like that, yet you have 20 years of scientific data on tap. I guess that is a question that you need to talk about with iwi and hapū, whether that's even a possibility or whether you start from now. Obviously, if you're wanting to include cultural health monitoring, you would start from now. You can't retrofit that, but what the iwi and hapū have is information around the historic health of particular areas. So that may be within their environment plans, that may be within land court minutes, things like that can give that background context. So even if you don't have cultural health monitoring data from 20 years, you do have a picture of what the environment used to be like through those historical records, through waiata, reo, pūrākau, things like that. It's not just numbers that can provide you with information to compare. So that's what I'd say about that.
Oh, that's awesome. And again, it's having that kōrero with your iwi research partner to discuss, discuss through their mātauranga, and that could be through wānanga, through interviews, whatever's comfortable for your partners.
Cool, thanks guys. Another question that's come in. So interesting about the mahinga kai values and wetlands wanting warmer, less shaded space. So how does that align with your Western science side, knowing that cooler, shady water helps our tuna happy and hot water stresses them out?
So for the Toreparu wetland, they wanted areas of both. So there were open areas where the tuna were move. I mean, the water's not boiling hot. There's just very cool and then slightly warm. Yes, warm temperatures do stress all native fish out, all fish. So having areas where they can go to with shade, but also those open areas where they tend to move around and feed and are more easily caught. So yeah, finding that balance, and that's why that working together is really important.
Cool. Another question that's come in is, how does the research phase link to the monitoring phase? Can be quite different processes. Skills and research often contracted out to research experts, monitoring done by monitoring teams.
So
Yvonne, do you want to?
I guess like how does that balance out between the research side and the monitoring side?
Again, it's a collaborative process, and you bring in a whole raft of skill sets within the project team. So you're not relying on just one or the other. It's definitely an inclusive process.
And I think too, it is really important having that connect between those people doing the, I guess, grunt work on the ground, the monitoring side of things, and why they're doing it. So really having that conversation for them to understand what the values are, why they're actually going out there monitoring. So yeah, having that connect between the research phase as all the way down to the monitoring phase, I think really enhances everyone's knowledge. Yeah, that's what I'd say around that.
Cool. So we've answered all the questions. So thank you everyone for submitting those. If you have any further questions that you would like to be answered, Yvonne and Mahuru's emails will be included in the follow-up email that will be sent out in just a few hours. Other than that, thank you so much for joining us today. We do have a follow-up webinar session booked for early next month with Sean Aotearoa and Nikki Harcourt. So please look out for that invitation in your inboxes also.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, ka kite.